beginning of March 1988, my mother, Joy Hammond, was in the third trimester of her pregnancy. As I prepared to come into the world, all-out war in the country of my birth seemed to be a distinct possibility. The decision had already been made in February to replace the National Servicemen and Permanent Force units of the ad hoc 20 SA Brigade with a fresh brigade from the conventional units of the Citizen Force. One of the best equipped Citizen Force brigades was 82 Brigade, and these reservists would now head to the front line with fresh equipment to take over from the war-weary units of 61 Mech and 4 Psi. 4 Psi and 61 Mech began demobilizing in the first week of March, and when the handover between 20 and 82 brigades was completed on the 13th of March, it marked the official end of Operation Hooper. Although the units were fresh, not all was well in the South African camp. The 155mm G5s had been the star of the campaign so far, allowing the SADF to dominate the battlefield for miles around. However, the 16 G5 guns originally committed had now fired tens of thousands of rounds and were becoming unserviceable. Worse still, there were no replacements at hand. When Operation Pakka started, the SADF could only field a single battery of G5s. In order to make up for the shortfall, they deployed a battery of their older G2s. First seeing action in World War II, these 140mm howitzers lacked the range and accuracy of their G5 counterparts. It seems that Armscore had other priorities besides the war in Angola. They were given a unique opportunity to exhibit their latest weaponry at the biannual Fidea Air Show held in Chile. Chilean President and renowned anti-communist general Augusto Pinochet had withstood UN pressure to allow the Armscore exhibit. With word slowly leaking out as to the deadly accuracy and range of the South African guns, the Armscore execs had pulled out all the stops. They had even shipped a G6 into the display. And not just any G6, this actual vehicle was one of the 3 that had shelled Cuito Cuanavale before being withdrawn. When the 3-2 Battalion Raiders asked for G6s to shell Manong, they were told that it was too dangerous and there were none available. The Armscore executives began to receive a windfall of sales for their magnificent artillery pieces. Both Iran and Iraq placed large orders for South African G5s. And so, as the SADF prepared their World War II relics, fresh G5s were rolling off the production line and heading to the Middle East. It was not just the Armscore execs who felt that the Battle of Cuito Cuanavale was not their first priority. The diplomats and senior generals were about to sit down with their Cuban and Angolan counterparts as part of peace talks orchestrated by US senior diplomat Chester Crocker. With Cuba making the first tentative steps towards accepting a policy of linkage and eventual withdrawal from Angola, the South African government was more interested in pressing Cuba than in any territorial gains. The first round of talks in Geneva, therefore, were full of bluster and bellicose rhetoric. South African Foreign Minister Pakka going so far as to say that South Africa would not withdraw from Angola until Cuba did, a position much more extreme than the one previously held. With the talks deadlocked, attention once again shifted to the battlefield, where both sides were desperate to gain a decisive advantage. The South Africans once again planned to attack the FAPLA bridgehead in the Tumpo Triangle. To carry out this attack, they had 82 Brigade, 3-2 Battalion and 4 UNITA battalions. The Buffaloes of 3-2 Battalion, the only unit continuously deployed throughout the campaign, would open the attack from the south. They would be supported by some rifles from Regiment Cuito Cuanavale. It was hoped that this attack would divert FAPLA's attention and convince him that the main attack was coming from the south, whereas the main force, consisting of 2 squadrons of Olifant tanks from Regiment President Steyn, would actually attack Tumpo from the north, supported by the remaining mechanized forces of Regiment de la Rey. UNITA would meanwhile attack the FAPLA forces guarding Cuito Cuanavale from positions west of the Cuito River. As Colonel Paul Foucher briefed the senior brass as to his attack plan, it was hoped that a successful attack may force the Cubans to make concessions at the negotiating table. The Cubans and Angolans had their own plans, however. FAPLA's 25th Brigade had suffered heavy casualties during the Second Tumpo battle, but had managed to reoccupy its defensive positions in the Tumpo Triangle. These men were reinforced with some Cuban elements as well as parts of FAPLA's 66th Brigade. Commander of the 25th Brigade instructed his men to strengthen their defences and dig in deep. Meanwhile, Cuban General Cetra Frias, commander of all forces at Cuito Cuanavale, evolved a defensive plan of incredible strength and depth. Anti-tank mines were laid in their thousands, with warning minefields and artillery observers placed to bring in the fire of over 60 FAPLA guns. In addition to their incredible depth, many of the mines had been boosted. Now they would not just blow off a tank's tracks, but entire wheels and suspension units, making the recovery of the 50-ton monsters that much harder. With the general satisfied, it was up to the soldiers to carry out their tasks in what was surely to be a decisive clash. At 7:10 in the morning of the 23rd of March 1988, the South African artillery opened up with their barrage against the Tumpo defences. They were soon engaged by some FAPLA artillery, but silenced them with their own counter-battery fire. The main attacking force, the 24 tanks of Regiment President Steyn, came out of the bushline and into the open of the Anharo Lapanda at about 8 a.m. They first made good progress until they hit their first minefield at around 8:30. It took 2 plof-udders to clear a lane through the minefield, as the prototype weapons were still giving problems. However, by mid-morning, a lane had been cleared and the tanks passed through it, continuing the attack. The Olifants advanced on the FAPLA positions as the terrain opened up and the Cuito Bridge came into view. The advance came to a screeching halt as the tanks hit a boosted minefield, blowing off an Olifant's entire suspension unit into the air. With the tanks now trapped in the minefield, under observation, General Frias unleashed the full weight of his awesome artillery. With the tanks accounted for, General Frias was able to switch the fire of some of his guns to the exposed UNITA battalions, inflicting heavy casualties among the guerrillas. The armoured recovery vehicles advanced under incessant artillery fire to try and extricate the immobilized tanks. They managed to pull one free, but the tank that had lost its suspension was unmovable. Another tank required 3 Olifants to pull it out, after which the metallic tow bar buckled and it was also stranded. As the Olifant struggled to withdraw, the third tank hit a mine. It was lightly damaged, but with all the tow bars broken, it too had to be abandoned. With the artillery never letting up, and MiGs bombing from the air, the South African forces slowly crawled back to their start line. It was the first time the SADF had left their tanks on the battlefield, and FAPLA made sure to make the most of their propaganda prize. The capture of the 3 Olifants was seized upon by the Pakka and Cubans as proof of an overwhelming victory. The fact that they had lost hundreds of tanks captured or destroyed did not sour their sense of satisfaction. The mighty South African colossus was shown to be human after all.
Dit was nooit die doel geweest van die RSA-magte om enige grondgebied in Angola te beset en te verower en te hou nie. Die doel was basies geweest om FAPLA Suid-Angola te ontsê, sodat ons daardeur vir SWAPO kan die gebied ontsê, sodat ons vriende die gebied kan beheer.
For the SADF, the Third Battle of Tumpo on March 23rd was an embarrassment. But they had lost no men, and it did not alter the strategic situation in southeast Angola. It did, however, lead to Operation Pakka being wrapped up early, and sending the reservists of 82 Battalion back to their wives and civilian occupations. In place of the large armoured formations, a much smaller task force would take their place. These men would not seek battle with FAPLA, but were there to lay a massive minefield in front of Cuito Cuanavale, where, together with a battery of G5s, they would remain in theatre to besiege the town and keep the airfield closed, and inflict a steady flow of casualties on the Cuban and Angolan forces stationed there. This steady attrition could then be used by the negotiators to gain concessions from the Cubans in the peace talks. In April, a BBC correspondent visiting the Chambinga Heights counted over 200 shells impacting the town within a 3-hour period. With Cuito Cuanavale neutralized and the South African government appearing to harden its position, the Cubans had to decide whether to make concessions or escalate the war in another theatre. In the end, they did both. Having taken the decision to deploy 11,000 of his best troops, Fidel Castro now had to decide how to use them in a way that would allow him to claim victory, whilst in reality he knew the Mavinga campaign was an utter catastrophe for the communist forces. If he deployed more troops to Cuito Cuanavale, they would be chewed up by the South African artillery before ever reaching the battle zone. So instead, as more troops and equipment arrived in Angola in early 1988, he deployed them to the southwest instead of the southeast of the country. The area north of the Cunene River, the 5th Military Region, now became the central focus of Cuban military activity. This area was somewhat of a no-man's land in that FAPLA controlled the major towns, but SWAPO, UNITA and the SADF patrolled and fought each other in the sparsely populated countryside. Since formally withdrawing from the area in 1984, the SADF had only deployed light counter-insurgency units in the fight against SWAPO. The Cuban military command decided that it was here that the elite 50th Division would make its presence felt. The 5th Military Region now became the Western Front. In January 1988, 3,500 Cuban soldiers deployed into the region, whilst the air base at Kahama was swiftly upgraded to allow Cuban MiG-23s to be deployed in the area for the first time. In a rapid and impressive 6-week construction campaign, both Kahama and Zangongo airfields became major bases of Cuban air power, completely altering the strategic balance. For the first time, MiG-23s would now be within striking distance of the Namibian border and the South African forces stationed there. More and more well-armed Cuban troops poured into the area, as Castro was determined to drive the South Africans out with an attack on their unprotected flank. Most dangerous of all were the formidable array of surface-to-air missiles that the Cubans brought into the theatre. What had been a vicious counter-insurgency battleground threatened to set off an all-out conventional war. By May 1988, the Cubans had deployed throughout the area, in a line from Namibe to Ongiva, and they were beginning to become very aggressive indeed. The Cubans joined directly with SWAPO to form joint battalions named Lion, Tiger and Zebra. This move itself was seen as a declaration of war by the South African generals. So when the Cubans began to seek out the SADF counter-insurgency troops and bring them to battle, the stakes could not have been higher. 101 battalion troops regularly patrolled in southwest Angola, hunting for SWAPO insurgents. On the 18th of April, one of these follow-up operations was ambushed by Cuban forces south of Zangongo. Two SADF soldiers were killed and 11 wounded, as the Cubans continued to expand their military footprint in the area. The next round of tripartite peace talks began in London on the 3rd of May. Chester Crocker's high hopes were dashed, as the talks soon broke down in great acrimony. The day after the talks broke down, the Cubans planned a massive ambush of a 101 battalion task force. The 20-odd Caspers were engaged by a Cuban tank company 2 kilometers south of Donguena. Furious but uneven firefight, the Cubans destroyed 3 and captured 1 Casper, killing 7 101 battalion men and losing 45 of their own. With the situation continuing to escalate, it seemed that all-out war between South Africa and Cuba was inevitable. The SADF could not sit back and allow Cuban troops to approach the border unmolested, while shielding ever more brazen SWAPO attackers. And it was into this climate of uncertainty and conflict that on the 30th of May 1988, I, Kevin Hammond, was born.